Hey, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you for being here this beautiful afternoon, even though it's a little cloudy. Still beautiful. We're alive. It's a Shabbat. So welcome those of you that are also connected to Zoom. Today we continue with the Torah portion speaking about Jacob. The Torah portion is called Vayetze, and it's found in Genesis chapter 28, verse 10 through chapter 32, verse 2. Again, Genesis 28, chapter 10. Through 32 verse 2. But before we start, I would like to say the Torah blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commanded us to engage ourselves in the words of the Torah. Amen, amen, amen. Amen. So last time we were speaking about Jacob, how Jacob, in a way, deceived his brother, and he got the firstborn blessing, and he got all this other stuff, and his father blessed him. And then his mom told him to go to her brother's home in Haran, so that way Esau would not kill him, because Esau was very, very mad for what had happened. So we see that Jacob is on his way to Haran so that he can find a wife. So starting in chapter 28, verse 10, today I'll be reading from the Cultural Background Study Bible. This one is the NIV version. Now they have it also in other versions like New King James, King James. It's an excellent Bible if you're interested in getting all the background, the cultural background, the context of what we're reading. So I highly recommend it. Unfortunately, it's not in Spanish yet. So chapter 28, verse 10 says the following. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, which in the Hebrew is the word makom. Hamakom, anytime you see that in Hebrew, is specifically relating to the place where the temple is going to be built. It says, when he reached a certain place, Hamakom, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Now, of course, it says stones, but the most likely is that he put stones around his head. He didn't really put his head on the stone, because I don't know if you ever try to sleep on a stone. I don't think it's going to be very comfortable. Yeah. So verse 12, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the messengers of God were ascending and descending on it. So this is a very, very special dream or a vision. And it says in verse 13, there above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So this promise is very similar to what the Lord had told Abraham, and not only Abraham, but also Isaac. And now he's also giving this blessing to Jacob. So we see here that the Lord is following through his promise and giving it to these three generations, from which we know that eventually Jacob is going to be Israel. Okay, so this blessing follows the genealogy, the generations. And not only that, so what's so important about what they describe as a stairway? Some versions call it a ladder. In this version, they call it a stairway. So if we understand the context, the culture during this time, anything that connected the heavens and the earth was considered a portal. Okay, it was like a gate. So what he's seeing here is a portal, something that's uniting both heaven and earth. It's a point where both things are connected. Basically, there's no separation. You're seeing the same thing that's in heaven, you're seeing it in the earth. So we know that eventually this is the place that's going to be where the temple is located. Why? Because the temple also is the point on earth that connects with heaven. And we also know that if we relate it to Yeshua, Yeshua is the one that connects heaven and earth.
Amen.
Okay.
Yes.
So verse 16.
Where was the portal? What word was that?
The portal is when he says that he saw the stairway, verse 12. Okay, so again, stairway and ladder, depending on but one thing that the commentaries say is that the ladder was not straight up, but it was slanted. Slanted in the sense where he's lying down, basically is going to be the part where the Levites and the Cohen in the temple could stand. And then as the ladder progresses, where he sees the angels or the messengers, is going to be what we're going to call eventually the holy place. And then where he sees the Lord, that's going to be the Holy of Holies. So right there in his description, he's describing the three areas within the temple, which is called the Azara. The Azara is where you're going to have the area of the court of the Levites and Kohanim, where you have the altar, holy place, and Holy of Holies. The Lord never changes his plan. He never changes the blueprints. Okay, so verse 16. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Because also you have to understand that even Jacob has to come into a relationship with the Lord. He's heard about him from his grandfather. He's heard about him from his father, but it's not the same when you yourself had that personal connection with him. I can tell you all that I want about the Lord. I can tell you all that I want about the temple. I can tell you all that I want about the covenant, but it's not until you make your own connection with him, you don't realize who he really is. Okay, so that's why he says that Jacob says, and I didn't even know he was here. So what happens? Verse 17, he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So that's why it's a gate. It's a portal, even though that physically we can't see, but we know that in the spiritual sense, there's this connection between heaven and earth. So basically heaven and earth become one. And it says in verse 20, in the verse 18, it says, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. Now there's a commentary that says that when he laid there, he took a whole bunch of stones. But then when he wakes up the next morning, all those stones became one. Okay, so he uses that stone. And not only that, the name for stone in the Hebrew, there is the word Eben. Eben. And when you break up the word Eben, you have the word Av, and you have the word Ben. In other words, you have father, you have son. You cannot come to the father unless you come through the son first. So it's both connections. You cannot separate the connection of having the father without the son or the son without the father. You need Yeshua to come to the knowledge of the Father. Okay, so it says that he placed and took that stone and made it as a pillar. Now, what is he doing? In the ancient Near East during this time, a stone or a pillar was used as a memorial. It was used as a place to marking a specific area that something happened. Of course, what happened here? The Lord himself reveals to Jacob that this is his place. This is the portal, the gate that connects heaven with earth. So he pours oil on it. Basically, what is he doing? He's separating it. He's sanctifying it. He's making it holy. He's making it's not like any other stone. This is a very special particular stone. And we know that also Yeshua is the cornerstone. So basically, this is the foundational stone that's going to bring forth the temple. And so he pours oil on it. And then he says in verse 19, he called that place Bethel. Now it's interesting because some people say, oh, this is not where the temple goes because it's Bethel. We know there is a city, a town, a place that's called Bethel. But Bethel, if you go into what it means in the Hebrew, it means house of God. So what is the house of God? The temple. So when he says Bethel, I don't think he's referring to the literal physical place Bethel, but to what's going to be the area. What is the area of the temple, which we know is in the region of Mount Moriah, and we know it's where the Temple Mount is, what's called the Temple Mount. Okay, so he says, though the city used to be called Luz. Now, luz, for those of us that know Spanish, we know that luz means light. But then again, luz in Aramaic means almond. We know there's a lot about almonds in the almond. Remember, that has the shape of an eye, which means the Lord is watching. And also we, yes, sheker or shaker, one of those two words. And so it also means that. Verse 20, then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So he makes a vow, he makes an oath. Remember that making an oath or a vow during this time is very important. You just don't say, I swear, and then forget about it. You have to follow through. Why? Because the vows were made in the name of God. In this case, Jacob is making a vow in the name of Hashem, the name of the Lord. And not only that, that the vow represents him, his word. So if he doesn't go follow through, he's going to bring shame to the Lord. Then he says, I'm going to give you a tenth. Now remember that, because it's going to be very important for next week's Torah portion. When he meets Esau, he does something that he shouldn't have done. Okay, so let's go to chapter 29. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. So again, if you've noticed that the wells have to do with salvation, wells, the water have to do with Torah, and also it's telling you that the stone was so big that they waited that all the shepherds would come to be able to move it and be able to have access to the water. Verse 4, Jacob asked the shepherds, my brothers, where are you from? We're from Haran, they replied. He said to them, do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson? Remember Laban is nephew of Abraham. Yes, we know him, they answered. Then Jacob asked them, is he well? Yes, he is, they said. And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Now remember that when we read he is well, what they're really asking in Hebrew is, how is your shalom? How is your peace? Are you complete? Are you missing something? Okay, it's not just saying, hey, how you doing? No, it's like, is there anything you're missing? Are you complete? So that's what he's really asking. And they say, yes, he is. And here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep. Now, if you remember, in this culture, it was very, very rare to find a woman pastor, a woman shepherdess, I guess you say, because it was usually a job for men. So if we see Rachel doing this, we have to come to the conclusion that Laban did not have any sons, okay, because this was usually a job for men. So she's the one that's taking care of the sheep. Verse 7, look, he said, the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture. We can't, they replied, until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. They all waited. This was a courtesy. This was something that was known in the culture, that you just didn't go there and did your own thing. You waited for everybody. So there was a fair share of water. So that would make sure that nobody abused and took more than they needed. But you have to remember that water here is very scant, is basically a commodity. It's very important for them. And not only that, they needed a lot of men to be able to move the stone that was over the well. While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. So he did it by himself. What does that tell you? Jacob wasn't a skinny little guy. Remember, he's a twin with Esau. And Esau was a strong man. He was a hunter. The only difference between Esau and Jacob was that Esau had a lot of hair on his body. Other than that, everything was the same. They had the same build. They were big guys. They were strong. They had to do a lot of work where they were, because even though they say that Jacob was intense, it doesn't mean that he was in a tent all day reading and studying. No, that means that he worked with the tents. He moved around tents. He had people moving in and out. And they're heavy. So this guy is not a wimpy little skinny guy. This guy is strong. So he comes here, and maybe he wanted to show off with Rachel. So he comes in and he moves away the stone over the well, and he gives water to the sheep. And it says, verse 11. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. So it's amazing how these young ladies run around, they have so much energy now, like, really? So he comes and kisses her. Now you're gonna say, he just met her. But remember that this was, again, etiquette. This was courtesy. This was a way to know that he was family. I mean, I'm sure he did it in a way that was acceptable, okay? So another thing is, she's so excited because he's telling her who he is. Okay, I'm the son of Rebecca. She's your father's sister. And so she runs out because she's excited because she finally meets them. Because we have to remember that in this culture, marriages were arranged. Marriages were arranged. It's most likely that Laban and Rebecca already had made arrangements with her two sons to marry his two daughters. And according to the commentaries, they say that Esau was supposed to marry Leah and Jacob was supposed to marry Rachel. Okay, so she's like excited. Okay, we're gonna have a wedding. He's here, la la la. So they're waiting. Okay, remember that being married in this culture was so important to women. Why? Because of the status, of the protection, of having children. And remember that a topic that we see a lot in the Bible is infertility. Why? Because first of all, it's God who's going to do the miracle. It's God who's going to get the honor. It's God who's going to get the glory. And not being able to have children was something that was shameful in this community. Why? Because they depended on the children for inheritance, for taking care of the parents, for taking care of everything they had. So she runs to her father. And it says in verse 13, as soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. Because remember that Laban, when they came to get Rebecca, he knew that Abraham had a lot of money. She got a lot of bling bling. And he says, okay, so this is Rebecca's son. That means he comes with a lot of money, with a lot of treasure, a huge bridal price. So he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, you are my own flesh and blood. Now, one of the commentaries say that by saying this to Jacob, after he heard all the information, that he in a way is adopting Jacob. Okay, he's adopting Jacob because remember, most likely he doesn't have sons. He's going to marry his daughter. So he sees him as a prospect to be someone that will inherit. Okay. So after Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. So here changes, Laban already is changing his idea about Jacob, because first he calls him, you are my own flesh and blood. And now he's treating him as an employee. How much am I going to pay you? So right there, we see a change in attitude. He's not seeing him anymore as an adopted son. Now he sees him as an employee. How much do I need to pay you? And it says, verse 16, now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. So she has some issue with her eyes. They say they were lazy. Some say that, doesn't matter. He really liked Rachel. Verse 18, Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Why does he say 7 years? Remember that a bridal price has to be paid to the father. Now, the bridal price is not that you're buying the bride, but you're giving a gift to the parents because you're going to be taking away someone that is part of the family, that helps out with the sheep, that does a lot of work on the in the area, in the field, and does so. Basically, is to give them some sort of compensation because she's not going to be there anymore. Okay, but we know that when he came in, he didn't have anything with him. And how do we know this? One of the midrash, one of the stories says that while Jacob was coming to Haran, he had a whole bunch of gifts, but that Esau, his son, came and stole everything from him. Esau's son was supposed to kill him, but when he saw his uncle, who looks exactly like his dad, he couldn't kill him. He couldn't, really do that. So what he did, he stole everything he had. And Jacob told his nephew, tell my brother that I'm dead, that you've killed me and you took everything I had. That's a story, it's a midrash. Whether that happened or not, I don't know. I'm just telling you one of the reasons why he came and didn't have anything with him. So it says, verse 19, Laban said, it's better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. Now he gives her Zilpah because that is what's called a dowry. Fathers were supposed to give a financial support and some gifts to the daughter in case either she became a widow or she got divorced or something happened that she would have something to continue. Okay, if she never used that dowry, then she would give it as an inheritance to her children. Okay, so what's going on here? Laban switches the daughters. Okay, he switches, instead of Rachel, he gives him Leah, but the issue thing, he's making a feast. Now remember that weddings in those days wasn't like today where you have a whole bunch of stuff going on. You just make a feast. It's usually that lasts 7 days. And then on that night, they come together. And it says, when morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Now, one of the things they say is, how was it that he couldn't see the difference between Leah and Rachel? Well, one of the commentaries say that they were twins. One of the commentaries say they physically looked alike. And another thing is that if, as you know, when they get married, they have their faces covered with a veil. Okay, and it's very dark. It's not, there's no electric lights and stuff. They went by candles. They're drinking, they're feasting. So he probably was a little, a little drunk, yeah.
She's in the bed before he gets there.
And well, probably she's there before he gets there. And so he doesn't even notice that it's her. When he wakes up and he says, you're not Rachel. So now he's mad. So he goes to Laban and he says, what is this you have done to me? I've served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? Now it's funny because a deceiver is asking another guy, why are you deceiving me? Okay, we know that Jacob, that was unfortunately one of his, not his best character, but he's asking a deceiver, ask another deceiver, why you're deceiving me. Laban replied, it is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Now, according to the culture of the ancient Middle East, nowhere has this rule ever been found. So basically he made it up. Okay, he's really deceiving. There was no rule nowhere because he paid her bridal price. He worked for her. He was owed, really legally, it should have been Rachel. So basically Laban really played a bad one on Jacob, okay? Because legally in that culture, that would have not been accepted. But since Jacob doesn't know all the stuff that goes on in the culture, he believes Laban that is true. Yes, sir.
We actually said he reaped what he sowed.
Yes, he reaped what he sowed. Absolutely, absolutely. So what happens? It says, it is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week. Remember, it's a whole week of marriage, of feast. Then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. So he's basically, taking out all that Jacob has, and he has to work now another 7 years for Rachel. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel. So like he did with Leah, that gave her a servant, now he's giving Rachel also one. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. It's not that he didn't love Leah, but he really, really, really loved Rachel more. And he worked for Laban another 7 years, because even though he finished his commitment of the 7-day marriage with Leah, he then has Rachel, but he still made an oath. He has to work 7 years for her. Verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. In other words, most likely Leah too was sterile. Okay, most likely she was sterile, because it says here, when the Lord sees that Jacob is not treating Leah the same equally as Rachel, he favors her and allows her to have children. Okay, so most likely both were sterile. And it says, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, it is because the Lord has seen my misery, because Reuben in the Hebrew is related to the word to see. Verse 13, and then she says, surely my husband will love me now. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Shimeon. They say in the English translated Simeon, but in the Hebrew Shimeon, which means from Shema, to hear, to listen. Remember that names are given with a purpose. They have to do either with a special event, or they have to do with the fate or the destiny of that individual. You just didn't come up with names, okay? You just say, okay, his name's gonna be Shorty or something like that. You came with a name that meant something, okay? Verse 34, again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I had borne him 3 sons, so his name was Levi. Levi has to do being attached, being close to something. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise or give thanks to the Lord, because the name can most likely means to give thanks more than to give praise. So she named him Yehuda or Judah. Then she stopped having children. Okay, so right there, she's got already 4 sons. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I'll die. Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in place of God who has kept you from having children? Because remember, the culture understood that a woman that did not have children, it meant that it was a punishment from the gods. So they still think that this is happening because the Lord is not giving her children. And so it says, verse 3, then she said, here is Bilhah, my servant, sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her. Again, remember that part of the culture was that when a couple were married and at least 10 years have gone by and the wife had not given them children, it was legally acceptable that the husband could take one of the servants, have children with her, and that first child would be considered a firstborn of his wife, not of the servant. That was legal and that was accepted. That's why Sarah, you had to wait 10 years. Now remember that Isaac waited 20 years. He didn't follow that rule. He didn't do that. Isaac was different. Isaac was the only one that had only one wife. because you have to also remember that Isaac is a pre-Yeshua. He's like a prototype of Yeshua. So he never had more than one wife. But here, remember the same issue happened with Sarah and Abraham. Sarah couldn't give him children. After a while, usually 10 years maximum. That's why Sarah says, okay, take Hagar and have a child with her. And that child that she has is going to be my son or my child. So here, Bilhah's firstborn is going to be considered Rachel's son and not Bilhah's. Okay, that was part of the culture and that was acceptable. That was legally acceptable. And so that child was considered a firstborn and was had also the same inheritance and everything else as the other children. So here is Bilhah, my servant, sleep with her so that she can bear children for me. That's why she says she can bear children for me. And I too can build a family through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, not Bilhah, Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. So that son from Bilhah is really legally belongs to Rachel, not to Bilhah. Because of this, she named him Dan. Remember the Dan has to do with judgment or a basically judging. So God judged and vindicated her and gave her this son. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, remember here it's Rachel, it's not Bilhah who's saying these things. I have had a great struggle with my sister and I have won. So she named him Naphtali, which means struggle. When Leah saw, now Leah sees that Rachel's having children and she had stopped having children. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. This poor guy must have been running from 10 to 10, back and forth. Oh, poor dude. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, what good fortune. So she named him Gad because it means good fortune. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, how happy I am. The women will call me happy. So she named her Asher. Asher has to do with joy or happiness. Now during wheat harvest, Shavuot, Reuben went out into the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Now they call it mandrake, the translation. We really don't know what they were. Apparently it was some sort of plant that was aphrodisiac and would, you know, that stuff. But anyway, when she brought to his mother Leah, Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. In other words, she's hoping that these will make her fertile, will help her to have children. But she said to her, wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? So imagine the conflict between these two sisters continually. You know, I have children, you don't have children, you want my mandrakes, I don't want my mandrakes, I have Jacob, you don't have Jacob, you know, back and forth. Oh, talk about a soap opera. And it says, very well, Rachel said, he can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. You must sleep with me, she said. I have hired you with my son's mandrake. How do you think he feels?
Oh, man.
For mandrakes? You're buying me for mandrakes? So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband. So she named him Issachar. Leah conceived again and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. The only mention of a daughter is with Leah having Dinah. That doesn't mean they didn't have any more daughters. But usually they're going to mention the one with whom the Lord is going to do something. You have to remember that Dinah means, like, is the female for the name Dan, has to do with judgment. Verse 22, then after all this drama, after all this time, then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph. and said, may the Lord add to me another son. So the word add, or to multiply, is the name Joseph. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you. So now now that he has his family, that he has his wives, that he has his children, now he wants to go back home. So he's telling Laban, remember that because of the oath and the promise that he had made to Laban, he feels like, he needs to let him know. It's not like he just can walk away. He has to have an away permission. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. So remember Laban, where he's living, this guy is not really in tune into Hashem, into the Lord. He's still with his pagan ways. He's making divination and he comes with all this weird stuff. And then we're going to see what happens with Rachel, that the guy is into idolatry. Verse 8, he added, name your wages. He's still treating Jacob as a employee, as a servant, not as a son or son-in-law. Jacob said to him, you know how I have worked for you and how your livestock has fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household? What shall I give you? He asked. Don't give me anything, Jacob replied, but if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all your flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages. Now, why does he say this? We'll see that later on in the chapter, we find out that he had a dream, that a messenger from the Lord had told him, this is what you're going to do so you can become prosperous, with the goats and the sheep. Because usually the goats and the sheep in this area were either white or black. You hardly ever saw ones that had spots or speckled or different colors. Usually they were either black or white. That was the type of goats and sheep that they had in that area in particular. So that's why he says, let me put these aside, and those will be my wages. Verse 33, and my honesty will testify for me in the future. Whenever you check on the wages you have paid me, any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark colored will be considered stolen. So what he's saying is, what he's going to be paid by animals, whatever is born out of those sheep and goats. Okay. Verse 34, agreed, said Laban. Let it be as you have said. Of course he agrees, because he knows that you hardly ever get spotted goats and spotted sheep, because usually they're either white or they're black, but not different colors. So he said, oh, sure, no problem. I'll give you those wages, because he thinks that none of those are going to be born. The same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled or spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark colored lambs, and he placed them in the care of his sons. So he took, from the get-go, Laban takes everything that is not pure white and pure black, to make sure that those that are colored don't stay in and start reproducing and make other sheep and lamb that have spots and speckled and whatever, because those are going to be the wages for Jacob. Do you understand what he's doing? I mean, the guy, Laban is deceiving Jacob from the start. He wants to get as much of him as possible and not allow him to become wealthy. Verse 36, then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flock. Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. So he's taking branches and he's cutting out some of the bark and making them spotted, like you have bark, white, bark, white. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, they made it in front of the branches, and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked and the dark colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself, and he did not put them with Laban's animals. In other words, by doing this to us probably doesn't make any sense. And maybe in the culture here, it would have been considered magic, but we know that it was a dream from a messenger of the Lord that told him, this is what you're going to do. When the animals come to drink water or they're mating, you're going to put these branches with all these white spots and areas. So when they're looking at it while they're mating, their DNA is going to be affected. That is called epigenetics. That is a true science. Epigenetics is things that physically can affect the expression of your DNA. It doesn't change your DNA, but it changes the expression of that DNA. That is why things like smoking, things like drinking, things like excessive things, eating a lot of processed foods, those things will alter your DNA. Okay, it doesn't change your DNA, but it alters the expression of your DNA. Even what you think. If you think you're going to get cancer, you will get cancer. Why? Because those things will affect the expression of your DNA. And that has been proven scientifically. So what Jacob was doing there was something that didn't come to show up in science till the year 2000. Recently.
Basically, they were drinking the water affected by the things that he was
Exactly,
doing.
because and they're all, not only was the water being affected, but what they were seeing while they were mating was changing the expression of their DNA, which meant that these sheep and these goats, in their genes, in their DNA, they had DNA that would be for spotted and speckled lambs and goats. But usually that is what's called a recessive trait, which means that for it to express, there would have to be a spotted goat with another spotted goat, and then the babies are going to be spotted. Okay, so for example, like people that have blue eyes and brown eyes, the brown eyes are dominant. So your child, the statistics is that a person with blue eyes and a person with brown eyes get married, at least one of 4 children will have blue eyes. But the first children, the majority is going to be dark eyes. Why? Because that's a dominant trait. Now, if a person with blue eyes marries a person with blue eyes, all the children are going to have blue eyes because that is recessive. So you have a recessive person with another recessive person is going to make that expression easier to come out. Okay. Now you also have what's called in between. Person with blue eyes and a person with brown eyes get married, and you might have 2 children with brown eyes, one with blue eyes and one with green eyes.
Or red hair.
Or red hair. So the thing is, it's all genetics. Did they know anything about genetics during this time? Absolutely not. Did God know it? Absolutely yes. So he gives them the idea, this is what you're going to do. He didn't say, okay, Jacob, we're going to go and do something that's called epigenetics. So he does that, and it's going to change how the DNA of these animals is going to be expressed. So by doing this is what happens. It says in verse 43, in this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. In other words, everything that was being born, he chose the strongest animals, had them mate in front of these branches, and then they would have babies that were speckled and spotted, and he would keep those. Why? Because that was the agreement with Laban. Anything that came out speckled and spotted is going to be yours. And Laban thought, no way, because most of the animals come out black or white. So that's how he made his wealth, with all these animals. And of course, remember that wealth was measured by the animals you had. The more animals, then you're able to trade animals for servants or other things. And so he became wealthy. Chapter 31. Jacob heard that Laban's sons, now Laban all of a sudden has sons. That means that during this time, he's able to have sons. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. So now he has sons. Okay, now this thing about having, in a way, adopted Jacob, Forget Jacob. He has now his own sons.
Mm.
In verse 3, then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So now it's a commandment of the Lord. Okay, your time is up. It's time to go back home. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. So he understands that what happened with these animals, it was from God. It wasn't anything else. It was supernatural. In breeding season, I once had a dream. This is where he got the idea from. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The messenger of God said to me in a dream, Jacob, I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, and spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Because now remember that Laban has had sons. Now Jacob is not the favored one. He's not the only son there. So now they notice that, our dad doesn't care about Jacob. So really, what are we going to receive? What are we going to get from our father? Verse 15. Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. In other words, remember that Jacob worked 14 years for them, 7 for Rachel and 7 for Leah. So basically he's used and abused Jacob, and they're saying there's nothing left for us. There's really no dowry. There's nothing, there's no bridal price. My father has taken advantage of everything. Verse 16. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. So at least in this, both Leah and Rachel are in agreement with Jacob. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. These are called teraphim. And what are teraphim? Teraphim are little idols that represent deceased ancestors. Okay, and so they had those because they believed, and this is the cultural thing, they believed that these little idols protected the family, protected the property. Some of them even used them to talk to them, to pray to them. And so this is how we know that Laban was still into idolatry. And these would go to the firstborn. Remember, the firstborn of the family would take care of everything, including any idols, any religious beliefs, any property, the parents, the whole family. So now these teraphim, instead of going to Jacob, they're going to go to the firstborn of Laban. But Rachel, because she says that God has basically given them all the wealth of their father, because he basically stole everything from Jacob, Rachel feels like these teraphim really should go with Jacob. He's the one that is the firstborn. He's the one that should have these as part of the inheritance. So she still steals them. Verse 20, moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean, but by not telling him he was running away. So there's a lot of deceiving in the story. First Jacob was Esau, then Laban was Jacob, and now Jacob was Laban. So it's again, very dysfunctional family. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night and said to him, Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you also have to remember that in this culture, dreams meant something. Every time they had a dream, they understood most likely that these were dreams from the gods. Remember that Laban is very superstitious. He's into idolatry. He has this dream, and he understands that this dream is not his gods, but is the God of Jacob. And he tells him, don't you dare do anything or say anything against Jacob. And so he had fear for it. So dreams were significant for these people. Verse 25. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? Yeah, right. Like if he could care much about Jacob, he was going to make a party because they were leaving. You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. Listen what he says to Jacob. I have the power to harm you. But last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why did you steal my gods? Now remember, Jacob has no idea that Rachel took them. Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now, Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So he basically says a curse, and that curse comes true. Because it goes upon Rachel, because he didn't know Rachel had them. So he spoke without knowing, because he says, who cares about your teraphim? I believe in the God of my father and grandfather. I don't have anything to do with your idols. So why would I take them? So he doesn't know about Rachel. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods, the teraphim, and put them inside her camel saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. In other words, she's having her monthly period, menstruation. And you know that even in this culture, they suspect that usually menstruation was due to demons. They thought it was a demon thing, that it had to do with sin, a punishment. And so they were afraid of those things. So anytime a woman was menstruating, they were like, okay, you stay on your side and I'll stay on my side. But we know that later on, when the Torah is given in the book of Leviticus, a woman that is menstruating is considered ritually impure. That means a woman with a period cannot go to the temple. Okay, that has nothing to do with demons. But they didn't understand that during that time. So she sits and tells her father, and so of course he doesn't come near her. Rachel said to her father, I'm having my period. So he searched but couldn't find the household of gods. Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked Laban. How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between two of us. Because Laban came with his family, probably with his sons, with all his servants, plus the family of Jacob. And he tells Laban, okay, in front of everybody, there are witnesses. Show me everything that you found that I have that belongs to you. Verse 38, I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. So anytime an animal was stolen or was killed by another animal, Jacob had to pay for that. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime and the cold at night. and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. This guy is you know, he's narcissistic, you know, he's selfish, and everything belongs to him. He thinks it's the greatest thing. All you see is mine. Sounds like a 2-year-old. Mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as witness between us. So now Laban wants to make a covenant with Jacob just to make sure that nothing bad happens between them. And he says, verse 45, so Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Again, this stone is going to be a representation and memorial of that covenant with Laban. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Why did they eat? Because eating was part of the covenant. That's how you express that a covenant was being fulfilled. Laban called it Yegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. Because the word Mizpah means watchtower. Verse 50, if you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives beside my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Remember that taking these oaths was very significant, was very important. You just couldn't break an oath. And if you broke it, you would have all the curses associated with that oath. Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap and here is this pillar. I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Because remember that to make this oath significant or to affirm it, they had to kill an animal. And that animal, the blood, they had to go through the blood of that animal, say the curses, say what it meant, and then they would eat from it. They would sit down and eat. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. Chapter 32. Jacob also went on his way, and the messengers of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is the camp of God. So he named that place Mahanaim, which means a double camp or 2 camps. Now it's interesting because right before he leaves to Haran, he sees the messengers of the Lord going up and down the stairs. And now that he's going back home, he sees another group of messengers. So he's from the beginning to the end, the presence of the Lord is with him. So with that, we finish the Torah portion. Questions? Yes, sir.
One thing that you mentioned at the very beginning, that Dinah was the only daughter mentioned.
Right.
But here on the verse 55 of chapter 31, it mentions that Laban kisses the sons and daughters. So
yeah, but it could mean that, but it also could mean later on when Jacob dies, we find out that he had other daughters and granddaughters that came to counsel him. So even though they mentioned just one, most likely they had more because it's kind of rare not to have any daughters.
Yeah,
he had so many sons, but most likely, again, remember when not all the family members are mentioned, doesn't mean they don't exist. It says that he has purpose with them, certain purpose with them. Okay. Yes.
chapter 31, verse 45,
Mhm.
we say Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. So that stone which he anointed, that you said.
It's not the same as the first one. This is,
Ivan. It's not the Ivan.
it's an Evan, but it's
Evan,
not the
yeah.
same as the first one. This is a different.
That's Bethel.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a stone of Bethel, and then there's a stone that he uses as a memorial, as a covenant, as a mark of the covenant that he made with Laban. But yes, the stone is still in Eben.
Okay. Evan.
Yes.
Second question is
Uh-huh.
that to change the DNA,
Mhm.
that yesterday I was watching some 119 minutes.
Mhm.
So they said this DNA, the vaccine has a Luciferian something, Lucifera something.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that now because we'll talk about that after recording.
Mm.
Miss Linda, yes.
Pastor,
Yes, ma'am.
I always have issue with this.
With what?
I don't think Jacob worked 14 years for both wives. I think he worked 14 years for Rachel. And Leah was just
But either way, it's,
was a pure accident.
yeah,
And I think also I was looking at something it was talking about Leah's deception.
uh-huh.
And because of this, sometimes when a woman deceives a man, it's difficult for the man to draw close because he's got to learn to trust her.
Yeah, but the issue wasn't Leah. The issue was her father.
Yeah, but she went along.
Of course, she's the daughter. Remember that Esau had been promised to Leah, so she says, "I'd rather have Jacob than Leah." So I mean, than Esau.
So it's,
We're just speculating.
I always tell people, I think he worked 14 years for Rachel because he loved Rachel so.
Yeah, but it still comes out to 14 years. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Another thing that I noticed, Rachel became being envious of her sister.
Mhm.
She approached her husband and said, "Give me children, lest I die."
Mhm.
I said, why is she pronouncing death upon herself?
Because it's shameful. Not having children was the worst thing that could happen to a woman during that time.
Yeah.
So it was basically,
It was-
she was dead. Basically to society and to the culture, she was basically dead.
For nothing.
She had no value as a woman because she had no children. You know, for us, it's kind of hard to understand it in our days, but at that time, not having children was probably better to
Devastating.
die than not to have no children. So that's
But
why.
I was just asking about her speaking the element of death and then, dying so young. You know what I'm saying? Twice.
She did die young because when she has Benjamin, because of the having stolen the teraphim and the curse that Jacob pronounced.
Now,
Yeah, she died very young. Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, I was studying, I said, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And that's why I tell people, watch what you say and how you say it.
Absolutely. Give me a second. Hilda, ¿tiene alguna pregunta?
Unmute it?
No, yeah.
Okay. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Hello there. I had a question.
Sure.
Back in 2822,
Uh-huh. 28.
at the very end of that, where Jacob mentions how he will surely give a tenth
Yes,
to you.
to the
Yahweh.
yes.
Do you think that this has any pertinence or anything to do with nowadays what we call in Spanish diezmos or tithes or in churches, or how do you correlate maybe this with any of that, if at all?
With the tithing?
Right, or the diezmos,
Oh, yes.
for example. Do you think this has any connection with that, or this is just something that he vowed and has nothing to do with any commandments?
Well, we have to remember that that they, even though the commandments were still not given in their fullness at Mount Sinai. There were still commandments they understood and that they knew because of Abraham. According to the commentaries, Abraham knew the written Torah and the oral Torah beforehand. God had revealed to him all the commandments, and part of the commandments is tithing. Besides that, tithing is a tribute. It's a gift that you give to your king in response to his generosity to your life. It's a way of expressing thanks. So you separate a tenth, which is the minimum that you should separate. And so both Abraham and Isaac and here in Jacob, they understand that this is a contribution, like a tribute to the king, the sovereign king. So there's nothing wrong with it. Now, later on, it becomes part of the commandments, the written commandments, but they knew about it through Abraham. Remember that Abraham, Jacob and Esau got to meet their grandfather, and their grandfather was taught Isaac, and Isaac taught them. So this tithing issue was already known to them, and is going to continue in the families all the way till we get it in a written form at Mount Sinai.
Written form. Mhm.
Today, most of the things they tithe was agricultural, based on the animals, based on produce. Most of us don't have animals, don't have that much produce besides. Yeah, but these things usually were taken to the temples. Now, even though Jacob does not have, the temple is not still built, he understands that this belongs as a tribute to the sovereign king. Today, if the temple were standing, any tithing that's done would have to go directly to the temple. Since the temple is not standing, the tithing usually stays within the community, within the congregations, to help with all the financial issues that it takes to maintain a congregation or a place of study, or to support the pastors or rabbis or whatever. So it's used in that sense. But if the temple was standing, tithe would go to Jerusalem. It is a commandment. And even if it weren't a commandment, I think most of us would agree that a way of showing thanks to the Lord is giving back something of what he has given us. It's like when we're kids. Usually we try to buy something for Father's Day or Mother's Day, and we know that it's with their own money that we buy things to our parents or for their. So in a way, tithing it was something that was known to them, and it continues to go, and then it will be a commandment at Mount Sinai.
But when he gives us, we give him back.
Yeah, what he gives us, we give back. Absolutely. Did I answer your question, or maybe I said too much?
No, I was, my main, the reason I asked that was, it's kind of confusing because I come from a Christian churches, and our churches, they would practically demand, a tenth of our wages, actually.
Problem is, and unfortunate, religious institutions, some of them abuse that. And the problem is that they use it for their own gain. They won't listen to any of the other commandments, but they'll do that one. So this is a gift. This is something that comes from your heart to the Father. I tell my congregation, if what you're giving is not because of love to Hashem, then don't give it. I don't know anything. The Lord provides for it. So if you're going to give something, you make sure you're giving it with a cheerful heart because you want to do it. I never ask people here, and those that know me, that have been here, know that I never around asking people to give offerings or to give tithing or anything. We have a box here in ARC. Whoever wants to give goes up there and gives. I never ask unless usually for another person that comes and teaches, like we had a visitor last night and we took up an offering for him. I asked for an offering for him, but we're not, at least I don't ask around because it should be known to people that go by the Torah that you should be grateful, and in a way that you demonstrate that thankfulness is by giving a tithe or an offering. And again, unfortunately, we need money to sustain this, to pay the bill,
Mhm.
electricity, to buy things, to keep open. If that people
Mhm.
just didn't do that out of their generosity, I wouldn't be here. There was no way. So again, it's not something to be demanded. It's something that has to come from your heart. If you're in a place that they demand you continually and they talk weekly, past week, tithing, the only interest that they have is in money, not you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm against that. Again, at this point, people should know and be mature enough that that is a commandment and it's up to them from their heart.
So by modern day standards, as compared to back in those days, obviously, like you said, the commandment during that time was because of agriculture or, whatever it was that those people did.
Right.
Nowadays,
It would have to be
Okay.
salary base. If you get a salary, your 10th should come out of that. Anything that you receive in terms of finances, a 10th should come out of that. Because one thing that people need to understand is when you do that, the blessings that you get from that are enormous. They can't compare to what you're giving. No way.
Yes,
Amen to that. I mean, whoever doesn't tithe, they're losing out on the blessings. Absolutely.
mhm.
Now, once you do your part, you did your responsibility. Whatever they do with that money, that's their responsibility.
That's on them.
Absolutely. You do your part and the Lord's going to bless you.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Just a second, Miss Linda.
Yeah, not only Sunday church does not teach about Shabbat because Shabbat actually levels up people's lifestyles and salary
Exactly.
because of the day the most money is made.
Right.
But if they don't work on that day, that levels everything
Right,
up.
right.
But these people are not teaching of keeping
Yeah,
Shabbat. So they look great like another business. So they're not really an entity that can be called like, like in the principles of God.
right.
It's another setting for a business.
Exactly.
Marketing and things
Exactly.
like that.
Exactly.
And their prosperity
Yeah.
teachers.
Prosperity
and
messages. The thing is,
that's why.
they do Sunday services. They hammer the thing about the tithing, but they won't say anything about Shabbat.
Exactly. Because Shabbat will
Because
level it up.
right, because Shabbat will take away, which is not true, because if you're doing Shabbat and people tithe, you're still getting a blessing. But it's not convenient to
In this
people
culture,
that,
it levels it out.
yeah,
In this
right,
culture.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am, Miss Lynn, I'm sorry, yeah. Give me a second, let me get
I just want to
Chuck
make
here
a
for a
comment
second.
that,
Yeah, Chuck wants to say something.
I just want to make a comment. that
Yes.
We learned that he served 14 years plus 6 years, so that's roughly
20
20
years, yeah, he
years.
served 20 years.
So Reuben had to be 20 years old,
Yeah, minimum,
minimum.
yes.
And the rest of the children, well, let's face it, they were young teenagers.
Yeah, 20 and below,
Yeah,
the
that's what I'm
children,
trying to get
yeah,
at.
the
That's all I
children are
wanted to share.
Reuben, and the other kids were, the youngest at this point is going to be Joseph.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when they leave, Joseph is the youngest one, the oldest one is Reuben, which is probably around 20 years old.
I just
Yeah.
want to share that.
Okay, thank you. Miss Linda.
Pastor,
Yes, ma'am.
I have great news in rebuttal to the comment that just made.
Mhm.
If we get out and truly tell people about the Shabbat being the Saturday. I
Mhm.
just had a friend changed his whole church from Sunday meeting to now they're Shabbating.
Mhm.
Okay, so ask God, he says the responsibility here in the realm of the earth is up to us to share what we are learning. And I shared it, and she just announced about a month ago that her pastor got up one Sunday and he said, this is the last Sunday we will be meeting. We're going to follow the word. And he took them through the word with all the scriptures about the Shabbat Sabbath being the seventh day of the week. And so their whole ministry has now gone to Shabbating. Thank you. But I tell everybody, because I'm excited about what I'm learning.
Yeah.
And we've got to tell people. Now, the next thing I wanted to answer the question that the young man asked last week's lesson, the 26th chapter and the 5th verse, he's saying, because Abraham obeyed my voice, it kept my charge, my commandments, and my statutes and my laws. So this lets you know, last week, that's the 26th chapter and the 5th verse. It shows that Abraham knew the commandments, the laws, the statutes, and everything.
Yeah,
And I can imagine Abraham also taught all this to Rebecca, because Rebecca came from this same culture that we're talking about today. So those years that he was alive, 20 years they were married, and then 15 years, I know Abraham had to instill the word of God in Rebecca. So, but if you look at last week's study, that 26th chapter and the 5th verse, it lets you know that Abraham knew Torah.
what's going to be later written at Sinai, he already knew. So
Yeah.
that's saying that all the commandments were passed down to the generations.
But I'm so excited about my pastor friend who has taken his church.
That I know 2 pastors already here that have done that, and they lost everybody. Everybody.
Right.
He hasn't lost his members yet.
Well, thank the Lord for that. But what I'm saying is that most of the time you make that change and people leave and do not stay.
Yeah.
Juan, you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say, is it safe to say that the Lord basically said, I have all the commandments to remember the Shabbat. That was the only thing he said, remember to keep it.
Yeah, well, he said to remember, to keep it, to do it. Yeah, absolutely. That Shabbat is a commandment that if you read all the commandments, the one that has the most saying is the one on Shabbat. So yes, it's a remembrance, because it's remembering him as creator, as sovereign. And every time we celebrate Shabbat, we're celebrating that. That he's the creator, that he's the sovereign, that we're his servants, and we are to honor and glorify his name always.
We're celebrating that.
Yes, ma'am. That's what the
We're
Shabbat.
celebrating life.
Well, that's part of life. Absolutely.
Creation is like-
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So basically, when Rachel, when she named her son Joseph,
Mhm.
he will add. So could that be the reason why she had to die after having Benjamin? Because that means there was going to be another one, right? He will add.
No, that wasn't the reason for her dying. The ad is that she wanted more children. Remember that's her first
Right, but
son.
that's what I'm saying. That had to be fulfilled with Benjamin, because he will add. She wanted more children. But
Yes,
then also the curse came. and-
exactly.
But she had to have that child. She didn't die before. But she had
Exactly,
to
exactly.
have-
She had to have Benjamin because Joseph meant adding.
adding.
Absolutely, yeah. Iris, ¿tenía pregunta? No. Any other question, you guys? Yes, ma'am. Hilda.
Me?
No, Hilda.
Okay.
Sí, buenas tardes, Shabbat Shalom.
Buenas tardes.
Me llama mucho la atención, obviamente que todo es con un propósito, cuando el Eterno le dice a Abraham del hijo de la promesa, pero también le habla específicamente a Sara. Posteriormente vemos a Jacob, que su madre no quería que se involucrara con gente que no estaba en pacto, digamos, más bien de su casa. Pero de repente se salen las cosas de control y Jacob se casa así con sus 2 parientes, pero resulta que las otras 2, bueno, algunos dicen que también eran hijas de Labán, pero más allá de eso me llama la atención que al final fueron 4 mujeres las que fueron las que trajeron, como quien dice, a los 12 hijos, las 12 tribus. ¿Esto tiene que ver con algo profético respecto a que sean 4, que tiene que ver con los 4 puntos cardinales y que el 4 tiene que ver con propiedad del Eterno? ¿Era algo como profético el permitir que fueran así las cosas?
Sí, lo más probable, porque recuerda que todos los números en la Torá, en la Biblia, en los profetas, simbolizan algo. Y entre las cosas, y recuerda que además Bilha y Silpa no eran israelitas, eran mujeres extranjeras, por lo tanto eso ya ahí está mostrando que el evangelio no va solamente a ser para Israel, sino para todas las naciones. Así que estoy de acuerdo contigo en eso, absolutamente. Our
Mm.
question was that having had 4 women, wives, Jacob, does that mean that it has to do with 4 north, south, east, west, the 4, how do you say that? The 4
directions.
4 directions, the 4 corners, and in a way it does, because it remember that the gospel is for all nations. So from there, it's going to spread out. So yes, the number 4 is related to that. Sí, tienes razón. Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir.
When you were talking about Laban
Mhm.
speaking to Jacob, that excuse me, these are my daughters, these are my sheep,
Mhm.
these are mine.
Right.
Mine. What came to me was, I will.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, the comment is that when Laban was saying, these are my children, my granddaughters, mine, everything is mine. He thought about the verses that, like Pharaoh said, I will do this, I will do that, you know. Yeah, and also we see that in Isaiah and in other places. Again, that selfish ego, that wanting to be more than God, just, you know, like God couldn't do anything. I'm the
It's
one
only
that's
through
doing.
him.
Yeah, it's the pure flesh. Yes, ma'am.
The 6 and number 6 of the years for the sheep and the goats, that represents their struggle between men. Like, what is that? The
6?
year. Yeah, because he works.
Well,
an extra 6
he
years.
works 6 years for the animals. Yes, remember the 6 has to do with mankind.
But
Some people consider it the 6,000 year struggle of humanity.
But they had a struggle between them already.
Yeah, the
so-
struggles. Yeah, remember again, all the numbers are symbolic. 6 has to do with
Mm.
mankind, with humanity, with the 6,000 years of humanity, struggles, flesh. Yeah,
all of that.
yes, ma'am.
are we done?
Mhm.
They said when Sarah gave Hagar to her husband
Mhm.
to bring a child, she said she became his wife. Hagar.
Yeah, when Hagar became, when Sarah gave Hagar to
Abram.
Abraham, she was
Abraham.
becoming his wife. But remember that the term wife there is a translation. It's basically he's having intercourse with her
Yeah,
and she's going to have a child.
yeah, I know, but that same Bilhah and Zilpah,
Right.
they become wife. They were not concubine, because concubine is one-time play, one time. But
Right.
but
Again,
these women, those who come under wife,
Mhm.
if husband want to go back, like he was going back to Zilpah and Bilhah,
Yeah.
more than one child, they
Yeah, but Jacob was going back to Bilhah and Zilpah more than once, not because it was something that he wanted. It was because what Leah and
Yeah.
Rachel wanted,
yes.
because they're servants. They don't become wives with the same status as Leah and Rachel. Even though they had children for Jacob, they never gained that status. They continue to be servants.
Yeah.
So Jacob went to them because his wives wanted
Agreed,
him to
agreed.
have more children. They never became, same with Hagar. Hagar never became a true wife. She never had the status. Remember when she's fleeing from Sarah,
Now,
God says to Hagar, go back
To your mistress.
and submit to your mistress. So that status never changes. They're still servants.
so in many
Mhm.
ways, they're like, well, the servants, but they're also like,
They're surrogates, what they call
Exactly.
surrogate mothers or
It-
surrogate
what
wives.
gets me is what do they think about the children? They're mothers of children. that-
Legally, biologically, they were mothers of the children, but legally they weren't.
Yeah.
Remember, it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
Has to do with the wives.
Mm.
He has 2 wives, and those are the ones that have status within the marriage and legal. Everything that they were going to inherit was going to be based on that.
Of course, they understood.
The
that.
they understood that, and they couldn't go against that because that was a legal thing in the culture.
It doesn't say if they were Israelites or not, because most likely servants.
They
are
were
not.
not most likely Israelites. They were probably women from that area, so they were not Israelites.
And could,
But once they came into the household of Jacob, they had to accept the God of Jacob. Once they were in the household.
in many ways, that's how come there were different nations also, because so we don't know whether they were Ethiopian or different nationalities.
Yeah, we don't know their nationality, but from being in the area of Haran, they were most likely that area of Mesopotamia. They were like from where Abraham came.
Right.
So yes,
Just,
Rachel,
Rachel,
Bilhah.
Bilhah.
Yeah, so she said that means God will give me a son through Bilhah,
Mhm,
that will be my son. you know.
yes.
But all over Bible, that son was not claimed by Rachel, or Bible does not claim that son belonged to Rachel.
No, yeah, when you're reading in the Bible, it tells you of the sons of Jacob that these were born to Leah, these were born to Rachel, these were born to Bilhah. But legally it doesn't mean it's their
Yeah.
children. They're just saying they were not born from Leah and not born from Rachel. They were born from the servants biologically. But in terms of legality, the
Yes.
children belong to Leah, Rachel, and Jacob.
So that's how the concept of adoption officially.
That's why the issue of adoption, if you
Yeah.
really want to understand what's going on,
Yeah,
I highly recommend that you look up the ancient rules of adoption
mhm.
in the ancient Middle East, because ancient Near East, because it's going to help you all these issues with servants having children, bearing children for their masters and their mistresses.
It's basically redemption, because that's all.
Even us, we're fall. Remember, Paul speaks a
Yeah.
lot about adoption.
Yeah.
So you can't understand Paul based on adoption today. You have to understand Paul based on adoption according to the
Yeah.
laws
yeah,
and the culture of the first century.
wow.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not really sure how to word it, but besides it being like God's will and him working out things for good, the thing with me has been like, why didn't Jacob just say like, no, I'm done with these games. No, I'm not gonna go intimate with you because of this and this. But he didn't say no, because that would have been the equivalent of saying no to your wife. She's basically saying, I want to be intimate
Yeah.
with you, right?
Jacob didn't say no. As a matter of fact, we don't hear much about Jacob either saying yes or no. He's kind of like pushed around and doing whatever he had to do.
Which
And
tonight.
which again, he had the choice. He had the choice, but you need to understand that Jacob understood there was a greater good behind all this, because he knew the promise that was spoken to his mother about the prophecy of them as children. He knew that he was there for a reason. He knew what Abraham went through. He knew what Isaac went through. So you just don't change things just because you want to do it your own way, because you've seen that it's been always God's way all through the previous generations. So he stood firm. Maybe he was probably had a big headache, a migraine every time he went from one tent to another and heard all the fussing and all the stuff going on. But still he understood there was a fulfillment of the promise of the Lord behind all this.
Plus he knew about his grandpa.
That's what I'm saying. He
Abraham.
knew about Abraham. He knew
Yeah.
about Isaac. He knew what had happened before. So plus the words that God had told him before he went to Haran, while
To
he's,
make him a
yeah,
sinner
and he's about to leave Haran, remember that the Lord speaks to him basically the same promises that he gave to Abraham and to Isaac.
So he knew.
So you just can't walk away from a word that the Lord has given you.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, because if you do, trust me, you ain't gonna like what's gonna happen.
No, okay.
So
But you know, the thing was, when you mentioned that he gets all these arguments and headaches, but in all reality, he, as you said, during that time, they all knew what was expected.
yeah,
So I don't
eventually,
think-
eventually they all knew what was going on. I don't think they
I don't think they argued that much.
at that. No, I'm not sure about that. I think they argued. Remember, you usually don't understand a lot of things until things have happened, and then you look back and say, "Oh, that's what that was."
Hindsight 2020.
Hindsight,
But
absolutely.
at the same time also that they were not kept like we are like in marriage right now, living in the same house in the same
We're
bed.
spoiled.
No, they had
They
had
their
different
own
tents. They had
places,
their
right?
own, separate
These will
tents.
only happen because of that particular situation was all about honoring and shame. Like they wanted
Exactly,
to just have a status and their sons to have a status.
exactly. Remember, they all lived in different tents. And again, Esther mentioned something that's very important in this culture is honor and shame. Okay. Any questions from you guys? Yes, sir.
You there?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I got a couple of subjects. If you could just touch on the subject of maybe the meaning or the significance of mandrakes, which I'm not too
Mandrake,
sure of.
they
And also,
translated as mandrakes, but we really don't know exactly what type of fruit it was. Apparently, it's a fruit that if you ate it, it helped with fertility. That's all we know. Exactly what it was, we really don't know, but they just called it mandrakes. It's probably one of the most similar maybe to what they were talking about, but at this point, we don't know what it was. It's just something that helps with making someone fertile.
Okay, and one more. I was wondering if you could, if you have any knowledge of the maidservants. Is it Zilpah? The two maidservants that Laban gave to his daughters.
Yeah, Zilpah and Bilhah.
Is it, yes, is there any knowledge maybe that they may have also been wives or they may have born children to Laban?
No, apparently not. Once they were given to his daughters, they were there. It was her property, not Laban's property anymore. So he couldn't take them as.
No, I mean prior to that.
Excuse me?
Prior to that.
Prior to that, apparently not. I mean, there's no mention of it. I've never heard anyone even think about it, but I doubt it that would be the case, because had that happened, then Jacob having children from them would have messed up the seed in a sense that the seed then wouldn't have been pure. So most likely they were virgins. Also, you have to remember these servants are very young. So probably they probably did not have any relationship with Laban. It would have messed up the lineage in a way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Miss Linda, anything else before we say goodbye? You need to open your mic again.
¿Serán sus hijas?
Sorry.
No, it's Linda.
I said pretty much not. I've had a great day today. I enjoyed my study and everything and my extra and listening to everyone.
Okay, well, thank you for connecting. I'll see you guys next time. Be blessed. Well, Shabbat is over. So
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Have a blessed week. Thank you.
You get
Thank
mail
you.
from, did you get mail? Did you get mail from me?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Shalom.
Thank you.
Ay.
Shalom.